Alright, so today we're going to be drawing mammals. So we're going to start by dividing the page into four. We're hoping to get four on here in our session today. Start with the horse. Cut the paper up to kind of show you how to do it. I'm going to start with the basic shape here. So this is our planning phase. We want to kind of sketch out the basic shapes we see and just kind of plan out the space, work out the proportions. So we're going to sketch lightly, and we just want to kind of break things down to basic shapes. So the torso of the horse is going to be kind of this bean shape like this. After we get this down, we want to start getting the legs sketched out as well. So the legs are basically like kind of long, skinny cylinders. And then this upper part we have kind of a widening cylinder. So then we're going to draw on the other leg here. We really want to pay attention to where these joints are, kind of sight the knees. We don't want to worry too much about the sort of outline. We're more concerned with kind of laying in and blocking in the shape. So next I'm going to add the back leg. So if I kind of sight the line or the angle of the leg, that's a good way to kind of start it off, get this angle correct, and then we can start adding on some of the mass of the leg. Again, it's kind of a cylinder that just kind of gets wider near the top. You want to think about the basic shapes that make everything up, and kind of lay those in as we complete this planning phase. So I can kind of use my pencil to sight the angle between where the hooves hit the ground. Got a little bit of an angle there. It's close to flat, but there's a little bit of an angle there. You can kind of sight that and measure it with the pencil. I'm adding in this back leg. Again, it's kind of a thicker cylinder up near the top. This one kind of hooks around a little bit. It's kind of a trickier shape, but again, we're just trying to simplify them as much as possible and start out our sort of framework for drawing on it. Now we have the neck here. The neck from the side is going to look like kind of a tall triangle, but it's also sort of a cylindrical shape that widens near the bottom. And we can sight the angle there if we want to get that laid in correctly. And then the head kind of has a circular, almost cranial mass. I can draw kind of a triangular shape and point it at the bottom. Then we have the muzzle coming off sort of like this. At the end of the snout, we almost have like a circular or almost spherical sort of mass where the muzzle is. Now we can add in the ears. We don't need a lot of detail right now, but we're getting to the point where we're going to start adding it, so we can put those ears in there. So for the next phase, I'm going to go back in and I'm going to start working my contour lines. So as I lay on the contour lines, I want to use my sketched in shapes as sort of a guide, plan for where I'm going to put them. But I want to pay really close attention to where that contour line goes. Before I start this step, it's probably a good idea to really take a close look at my plan and compare it to my reference and try to figure out if there's anywhere I'm off, anywhere I need to fix it before I start laying in my dark contour lines. So as I'm laying in the contour lines, I really want to think about details and the sort of nuances that are happening with this line. I want to take it slowly and make my way around. And I don't just necessarily get the outline, I can get some of the interior details as well at this point. As I'm drawing this in, I want to compare all of these points to each other. So anytime I hit a corner, like one of these joints, or I go around a bend, I want to look at my reference and see where it is exactly in the picture, what's directly above it, what's to the left, what's to the right, so that I make everything kind of line up correctly. I can also look at these negative spaces, like the space that's between these two back legs, and try to make the shape that I'm making as I draw the same as the shape that I have in my reference image. So sometimes it's easier to look at these negative spaces rather than the positive shape of the legs, and kind of switching back and forth between looking at the actual shape we're drawing and the negative space created by the legs or whatever can help us to get a more accurate drawing. Sometimes it's easier to use the negative space for whatever reason. And as I close up my outline, I can start to add some details. So I'm going to add some on the mane sort of bouncing around. I can also start shading. So I want to look for the dark shadows. So anything that's very dark or medium dark, I want to kind of shade in with my pencil at this point in time. So some of them are going to be just little dark lines where maybe I thicken up my contour line a little bit. And some of the shadows, like under the belly there, are going to be a little thicker. I want to start my initial shading with probably a medium dark, and then I can get the really deep shadows with the dark dark. Here I noticed that I've forgotten my tail, so I'm kind of drawing that in. So we start with sort of that bony structure that makes up the tail, and then we can draw the hair coming off of it. We also maybe, as we're drawing this hair, we want to think about it as being a mass. So I've got this shape in here. It's kind of like the part of the fur or the hair on the tail where it's all kind of clumped together into a solid shape. And then we have all the individual strands kind of coming off. So under here I've got a pretty dark shadow. So I kind of drew in the edge of the border there, and now I'm shading that shadow in. And that's probably going to be my darkest spot, so I want to get as dark as I can in that area, and that's going to kind of define my value range for the whole drawing. Now I can kind of shade in the darker fur. I don't want to go too dark on this, so it's important that I get my shadow areas as dark as I can, and then I have plenty of value range to shade in the darker fur on the horse. I can erase out highlights. Sometimes it's a little easier to erase them out than it is to draw around them. So in situations like that, I'll just kind of shade the entire area and then pull the highlights out with my eraser. I've noticed here that maybe the spine drop's a little low, so I'm going to kind of redefine that edge a little bit and pull that contour line back out. Get a little more accuracy. And I can kind of continue to refine this and smooth it out and get more kind of tonal nuance and continue the drawing as I want. But we're shooting for like 4 10-minute drawings, so I'm going to move on. And the next thing I'm going to do is a gorilla here. So I've got this big kind of round stomach shape. And I've got the chest shape sitting upon it. Then the head. And then I just have to figure out the appendages, the arms and the legs. I'm going to start by sketching in the stomach shape. And kind of drawing in this chest shape up on top. And now the head. So this is a little bit like drawing a human head. We've got kind of this cranial mass here. It's a little more oval or egg shaped. We've got kind of this facial plane on the front here. So then we've got the leg, which is almost kind of folded over. It almost makes like an egg shape. It's like sort of a squished sphere. I've got the arms, which are again going to basically be kind of cylindrical. There we go. And I've got the arm on the other side here, just kind of coming down. Again, like 2 sort of cylindrical shapes joined at the elbow joint. And I'm drawing in the foot there. So when I draw in the foot, I kind of draw all the toes together as one blocky mass, except for that foot thumb I draw separated. So instead of drawing the individual toes at this point, I kind of draw them together as one solid mass. So now I'm going in and drawing my contour lines. As I draw my contour lines, I kind of want to think about the texture on the animal. So the horse is really sleek and smooth. The gorilla is much more hairy. There's much more visible hair. So as I draw in my contour line, where appropriate, I might want to kind of change my line quality, make it a little more broken up. So here I've got this kind of face. So I might block in the eye line there. I'm kind of looking at the axis of the nose and the angle that goes at. Block that in too. Just kind of mark the angles of everything to start. Then kind of the muzzle comes around this way. Might block in a little bit of that detail. I think the eye line's a little bit low, so I'm raising those eye sockets up a little bit. Kind of blocking in those eye sockets and nostrils. And I don't want to get too detailed right now, because again, we're trying to keep this to like 10 minutes-ish. So I don't want to get too distracted working on details. But I'll kind of block the basics of that face in. I think I get a little big with the stomach here, but that's okay. And so as we're drawing in our contour lines, we're kind of thinking about which details are important. So which ones show up strongly and which ones are important for clarifying what's going on in the drawing. Sometimes it can be hard to tell exactly what's going on with the animal's body. You really need to, you want to just kind of look at everything and break it down into an abstract shape. Just try to capture the shape correctly rather than trying to invent what's going on in there and make it all make sense. If you can't see it, probably don't draw it. Just leave it vague, and that's usually okay. So again, I'm blocking in the toes as a single mass here, except for that foot thumb. And here's the hand coming down. It's kind of resting on its knuckles here. So we got kind of a square structure. That's the palm of the hand. And there's the thumb. I can see two fingers kind of curl around and make kind of a box shape down here. So I want to kind of look at all these really dark areas. I'm going to start shading them in first. And as I shade this, I want to really think about the texture I'm trying to get. So as I shade, I can also apply texture. So the strokes I'm using to shade these are kind of long, curvy strokes because the gorilla has long hair in a lot of these areas. But I might do it differently when I'm working in an area like the chest or maybe the stomach where the hair is a little shorter. But I do want to be mindful of kind of the texture I'm trying to capture as I shade in my gorilla. So right there, the fur is a little shorter, so I can shade with the side of my pencil, make it a little more smooth. Really long fur is up on the arms here, kind of going across the shoulders. And there I get to use those kind of long flowing strokes. Alright, so now we'll move on to the next one. Next we're going to draw this dog. So again, I want to kind of think about the body shape, where I want to position it, how big I want it to be, what the shape looks like. So I want to think about this line of the spine. I want to kind of look at the angle it's making, but then I also want to think about the curves of that line as well. So once I have an idea of the general angle, I can come back in and try to get the curves happening correctly. So again, we got kind of a bean shape for the torso. One end of the bean is really big, one's a little bit smaller. Maybe you can think about a peanut with two nuts in it, one big one and one little one. That's kind of the shape we'd get. So then we have kind of a triangular shape for the head. Let's look at the angle on there. Coming down a little more like this. So we've got kind of a triangular head shape. We've got kind of a triangular neck shape joining the head to the bean. I've got slender legs happening. There's a lot of bends and angles, so I kind of want to sight the angles and figure out what direction each part of the leg is going. So I'm going to kind of draw these stick legs in here to figure out how long each section needs to be and what angle it needs to be going at. And when I look at the tail, it's almost also broken up into little sections. There's a little bit of curve, but there's also like an angular nature to it. So there's almost 3 segments. Alright, so now I'm going to come back in with my contour line. I really want to try to pay attention to what's going on the outer edge of the dog here. Work our way around the ear here and forward, and the brow line is kind of halfway between the ears and the nose. Back. A slightly open mouth here. Elbow. Front of the leg and the chest. There we go. And then we'll get this leg back behind him. So we've got a thick thigh back here. And down to the paw. And then this back leg. Now I'll get the tail. I think I need to add a little more to the ears here. Eye on the nose. So now I can start shading it. I'm gonna just tone the whole dog. The dog's kind of a middle tone, so I want to work from kind of a middle gray out. So after I tone it, I can erase to add the highlights, and also add shadow by drawing a little darker. So I want to be able to go both directions with it. So I've noticed now that you can see this back leg back behind the front leg here, all the way up almost to the tail. So I'm going to add that in. I'm going to move that front leg forward a little bit, just adding in the sort of shadow shape here. I'm going to start to sketch in the rest of the shadows. So I'm just kind of looking at the strong shadow areas. So our dog here is pretty sleek, so you could probably shade it in by using the side of my pencil and trying to get a nice smooth shading on there as much as I can. Also probably wouldn't hurt to use some cross contour strokes when I lay in my base tone. I didn't do that, but it probably would have been smart. Now I can erase to get some of these highlights. Again, the dog's really sleek and shiny, so it's going to really accentuate the light on its body. There we go. There's our dog. So last we're going to do the elephant here. So again, we want to break it down into kind of simple shapes. So the elephant has more of like a single shape to its body. With a lot of these animals, we have like kind of a separate hip and rib cage area. But the elephant, it's almost more of a massive shape. The waist is kind of obscured. So it's something like this. And we have like kind of a triangular head almost happening right here. And then that trunk is like a cylinder, a bent cylinder that kind of starts out thick and thins out as it goes. Then the ears are almost triangles, and they're flat, so that they don't need to have a lot of three-dimensionality to them. They're aiming right at us, so we kind of just draw these big, almost triangular shapes. Then I kind of want to sight the angles of the legs. Might start by sketching in kind of the skeletal structure, just to get the angles and lengths right. And then I might kind of add the mass of the legs in, make them thicker. Again, when I'm drawing these legs in, and really look at the negative spaces in between the legs. Those will be really useful for helping me draw them more accurately. So again, kind of upper leg is sort of cylindrical shape that gets thicker as it gets towards the body. And then the lower leg is almost a cylinder. There's a little bit of variation in it, but it's pretty close to cylindrical. Then the feet are almost like half spheres, like an upside down bowl shape. So really when we're sketching these, we're trying to move from like most obvious thing to least obvious thing in a logical order. So we want to think about kind of the positive space that the animal takes up, and that's kind of our planning phase, is drawing out that positive space, getting everything proportional, finding the right lengths and angles for everything, just trying to figure out where everything's going to be. And then we come in and we draw the outline and sharpen it up. So that's where we start getting the details. We really want to pay attention to the nuance. And try to be as accurate with that outline edge as we can be. We also want to get important interior contours. And as before with the other animals, as I'm drawing this kind of the contour line drawing, I want to kind of think about the texture of the animal and its surface, and how the contour line should feel, how that should inform the quality of the contour line. So for the elephant, we've got kind of a rough creature with a lot of wrinkles and folds. And so I might think about that as I'm drawing my contour lines, but especially as I'm shading it. So I want to go from kind of biggest things to details. So I got kind of the appendages drawn in. Now I'm adding the tusk. The tusk is a little bit smaller than the legs. So I'm kind of defining details in order of how maybe obvious or large they are. Another good way to kind of prioritize how you add the details is like what's most interesting or important. If you focus on a specific area, it's going to create a focal point. So if you find one area particularly interesting, or you want to focus your viewer's attention on it, spending more time there is a good way to make that happen. The contrast between the level of detail and that focal point and the rest of the drawing is going to draw the viewer's attention there. Alright, so there's a lot of kind of confusing stuff happening with this trunk and this leg. Maybe made some errors in there, but that's okay. Just keep going. This is a simple 10-minute drawing for practice, so we don't have to worry about being too perfect. Kind of drawn in the eyes, some of these cross contours. The elephant has these nice cross contours going across the trunk, these big wrinkles that really kind of define the shape. And that's a really nice example of how cross contours can help define a form. So you see it, the elephant naturally has those wrinkles across its trunk. When we draw those, it really kind of shows us the shape of that trunk. So here, as I'm drawing my contour line, I'm kind of breaking it up. The edges of the ears, if you look at them on the elephant, are really ragged, kind of almost look torn up. So I want to kind of pay attention to that as I go through. And I'm not necessarily paying attention and getting every sort of crack and tear accurately. I'm just kind of mimicking the feel of that line. So here as I start to shade things in, I'm using a lot of kind of rough cross-hatching, which I think is really appropriate for the texture of the elephant. So if you look at its skin, it really has a very similar pattern to this rough cross-hatching where it has wrinkles and cracks sort of going one direction and the other. So it's a good way to shade it and sort of show some of that texture. A strong shadow on the underside of the trunk here. Kind of dark all the way. And some shadows in the ears here. And I could really go much darker with this, kind of build it up and continue to work those shadow forms. It's kind of got a weird thing happening with the tusk right here where it's overlapping the trunk. It looks like the trunk should be in front. Alright, so there we are. 4 10-minute drawings. Should have something roughly approximating this when we're done. And there we go.